first time Kale Voss saw the Morith fleet. He was standing on the roof of the Korova Basin Research Station with a cup of cold coffee in one hand and a wrench in the other, watching the sky turn silver. They came in lower than anyone had modeled, lower than the defense grid had been calibrated to intercept. 47 capital ships moving in a crescent formation so precise it looked drawn by hand. The coffee fell. Kale did not notice either. He stood there with the wrench at his side and watched the crescent hang over the basin like a second horizon, and he thought, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Then, the first city went dark behind him and he stopped thinking about beauty. The Morith had not come to destroy, that was the horror of it. They had come to take. Their transmission reached every broadcasting frequency within 6 minutes of orbital insertion. The voice that delivered it had no gender, no warmth, no inflection that any human linguist could map to an emotion. It simply stated that humanity's age of independent development was concluded, that the resource extraction phase would begin in 14 standard cycles. That compliance was the only variable that remained within human control. They called it the conveyance dump, a term that showed up in the xenolinguistics database later, once the Morith databanks were partially cracked, a word that meant something between harvest and curation, the way you might use it to describe moving livestock to a better pasture, helpful, efficient, final. Kale was not military. He had never wanted to be military. He was a propulsion physicist who had spent 11 years trying to solve a problem that everyone else had stopped caring about. How to move a large mass through deep space without burning half a planet's energy reserves to do it. He had a theoretical framework, 2 broken prototypes, and a former colleague named Daria Sovach, who had once told him his ideas were elegant and impossible, and she'd said it the way some people say, beautiful and pointless, which is to say with a sadness that means they believe you anyway. Daria ran the Korova Basin Station now. He was the one who found him still on the roof 40 minutes after the fleet appeared, and she said very quietly, "Come inside, Kale." He followed her inside. Neither of them said anything about the fleet. There was nothing useful to say about the fleet. What they talked about instead was the Sotheby drive. That was the thing Kale had been building, slowly, impractically, at the extreme edge of what the station's equipment could manage. For 3 years, it was not a weapon. It was never a weapon. It was a propulsion system based on a principle Kale had stumbled across in an old thermodynamics paper. A principle that described how energy could be phase-shifted across a boundary state in a way that produced thrust without reaction mass. The Morith, according to everything the intercept teams had managed to pull from their transmissions, used something similar. But where their system was vast and slow and required enormous infrastructure, Kale's, if it worked, was compact, small enough to fit in a ship the size of a transit freighter. "It doesn't work yet," Kale said. "I know," Daria said. "I mean, it doesn't work at all. Second prototype destroyed itself at 14% output. I know that too. So you understand that when I say this is a long shot, Kale." She looked at him across the cluttered table with something in her eyes that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite desperation. Something in the middle, something human. "Don't trouble yourself about the odds. Just look at the problem and get to work." He recognized the shape of that sentence. His mother had said something like it once, when he was young and frightened and standing at the edge of something that looked too large to cross. "Don't think about the other side. Just take the next step." He took the next step. The Morith were methodical. In the 14 cycles before the extraction was scheduled to begin, they did not attack. They observed. Their survey drones moved through human-occupied space with the unhurried confidence of something that has never been surprised. They cataloged resources, population centers, orbital infrastructure. They did not communicate further. They had said everything they intended to say. What the Morith had not cataloged was the Korova Basin Station, because the Korova Basin Station was not in any active registry. It had been defunded 6 years earlier and technically decommissioned. Daria had kept it running on a combination of private grants, personal stubbornness, and the kind of creative accounting that government auditors are too overworked to question. Station sat in a magnetized valley that scattered sensor returns. To a Morith survey drone, it looked like geology. This was, Kale would later decide, the single most important piece of luck in the history of his species. He worked for 11 of the 14 cycles without sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch. Daria worked beside him. There were 6 other researchers at the station, a materials specialist named Hobb, 2 engineers whose names Kale kept forgetting and having to check on the duty roster, a xenolinguist named Priya, who had been trying to decode the Morith databanks, and a teenage girl named Su Jin who had arrived 3 days before the fleet, and whom nobody had sent away because there was nowhere to send her. Su Jin had a gift for keeping systems stable during high-stress tests. She didn't panic. She had the calm of someone who has already accepted that things can go wrong and has decided to be useful anyway. You should leave, Kale told her on cycle 9. Where, she said. He had no answer. On cycle 10, the third prototype held at 60% output for 18 seconds before the phase matrix destabilized. 18 seconds was not enough. They needed sustained output. They needed the drive to hold at full power long enough to accelerate a ship to a velocity the Morith fleet could not match. Not to outrun them, not exactly, but to reach a specific point in the system where Priya had found something in the Morith database that she described very carefully as a control node. They're not a fleet, Priya said, standing at the whiteboard with a piece of marker in her hand, and the kind of expression people wear when they've understood something they wish they hadn't. They're an extension, like fingers. The fleet receives instructions from something further out, something that coordinates the entire conveyance operation across multiple systems. A command ship, Daria said. More than that. The word in their language is. Priya wrote a symbol on the board that nobody could read. The closest translation is something like the voice that carries, the signal source. Signal stops. The fingers don't know what to do, Kale said. Priya nodded. Based on what I can read of their operational doctrine, yes, they don't improvise. They execute instructions. Though, without the node, they would default to holding pattern behavior, essentially stasis, until new instructions arrived. How long would that take? From this distance, centuries. The room was very quiet for a moment. So we don't fight the fleet, Kale said. We go past it. Hob, from the corner, said you'd have to go through it. Past it, Kale said again. Thunder. Fast enough that they can't track a lock. Fast enough that by the time they react, we're already through. He looked at the drive schematic on the table. The fourth prototype was half assembled. The phase matrix was redesigned. Daria had found a solution to the stabilization problem at 3 in the morning 2 days ago. She had woken Kale up by throwing a data pad at his head, and it was elegant and possibly impossible, and he believed it anyway. I need 2 more cycles, he said. You have 2 more cycles, Daria said. Kale did not tell anyone what he had already decided, that the ship would only carry 1 person. The drive was experimental. The transit would be brutal. Forces no one had modeled, through a gap in the fleet's coverage that Priya calculated at roughly 40 meters of clearance on each side. Single pilot, no crew, minimum mass, those were the physics. He told himself this was a practical decision. He believed this for about 6 hours, at which point Daria sat down across from him and said, I know what you're planning. It's the most efficient, I know. I'm not arguing. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm just telling you that I know, so you're not carrying it alone. He didn't know what to say to that. Thank you. She said, don't thank me, come back. He thought about asking her to come. He thought about it seriously, ran the mass calculations again in his head, knew the answer, and did not ask. Some things are not about physics. Some things are about what you owe the people who kept believing in your impossible work when everyone else had gone. The fourth prototype achieved sustained output at cycle 12, day 2. 91% for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before Kale shut it down manually because he could see the readings beginning to drift, and he wanted to stop it on his terms rather than let stop itself. 91% was not 100%. 100% was not guaranteed, but 91% was enough to get through the gap. He told Hob to prep the Sable, a transit freighter that had been sitting in the station's underground bay since before Kale arrived. Hob prepped it without asking questions, which was, Kale decided, the mark of a good engineer. On the last night before Cycle 14, Kale sat on the roof alone with a cup of hot this time, and looked at the Morith fleet where it hung over the basin like a permanent second sky. 47 ships. The crescent had spread somewhat as individual vessels moved to survey positions, but the shape of it was still there, still precise, still carrying that terrible beauty he had noticed on the first day. He thought about his mother. He thought about Daria's face when she said, don't trouble yourself about the odds. He thought about Su-Jin sitting calm in the test bay while the phase matrix went critical, making small adjustments with steady hands. He thought about Priya drawing a symbol on a whiteboard with the expression of someone who has understood more than they wanted to. He hummed something his mother used to sing. He couldn't remember all the words, just the shape of the melody, and he hummed it quietly in the dark under the alien fleet until the coffee was gone. Then he went inside and finished building the drive. The launch window was before dawn. Bob had installed the Sotheby drive in the Sable's aft section with the kind of workmanship that looks improvisational, but is actually the product of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and simply run out of time for aesthetics. The freighter smelled like ozone and old insulation, and the particular sharpness of a system that has been asked to do something it was not designed to do. Thale ran through the pre-flight sequence alone. He had asked the others to stay in the station, partly for their safety, partly because he didn't want to spend the last few minutes before launch managing emotions, his own included. He had said his goodbyes the night before efficiently without ceremony, in the way of someone who has decided that ceremony would crack something open that needs to stay closed for a few more hours. Theria had given him a small data chip. Priya's translation work, she said. Everything she decoded from the control node records. Just in case you need to interact with the system when you get there. I'm not a linguist. The system has an interface layer designed for non-specialists. Morith are not all the same rank. Lower rank operators need accessible controls. Kale looked at the chip. You planned this out. We all did. While you were building the drive. She shrugged. The way she always shrugged when she'd done something that deserved more acknowledgement than she was willing to accept. Someone had to. He clipped the chip to the console panel where he could reach it quickly. He pulled on the restraints. He looked at the pre-flight readings one more time. Thought. Elegant and impossible, he pushed the throttle up. Dear. The Sable came out of the underground bay at full atmospheric thrust, punched through the magnetized valley's interference layer, and was in open sky before the Morith sensor grid registered the FutureWar anomaly. Kale had the drive at 70% before the first targeting solution appeared on the fleet's telemetry. He could see the sensor locks in the proximity alert feed, 6 of them, 9 of them, the crescent reorganizing itself the way a system does when it detects an unexpected variable and begins calculating a response. They were calculating. Kale was already moving. He hit 91% at the edge of the gap. The next 14 seconds were not something he could describe clearly afterward. There was pressure that the restraints were not sufficient to handle, a sensation like being compressed from all sides simultaneously, a visual distortion in the forward screens that resolved itself into a strobing of light and dark as the Sable passed through the electromagnetic wash of 47 capital ships, at a velocity those ships had not been built to intercept. He heard something in the hull that sounded like protest. He heard the drive doing something it had not done in any test, a harmonica resonance in the phase matrix that he had never modeled, that should have meant catastrophic destabilization. That the matrix held. He came out the other side with a hull temperature reading that was wrong in a way that meant the sensor was broken rather than the hull, which he accepted as good news. He came out with the drive at 88% and holding. He came out into the deep outer system with the Morith fleet behind him and the control node 11 hours ahead. He reduced thrust to maintain. He ate something from the emergency rations that tasted like cardboard and salt. He looked at the stars ahead, which did not look different from the stars he had always known but felt different now, felt earned somehow, felt like something he had crossed a line to reach. He pulled up Priya's translation work on the console panel. The control node was not what he had expected. He had imagined something military, a fortress, a weapons platform, something that announced its power through scale and armament. What he found was more like a relay station. Deep, compact, precise humming, with the quiet industry of something that has been doing the same task for so long it has ceased to think of itself as doing anything at all. It did not shoot at him when he approached. It scanned him. It issued a query in Morith operational language that Priya's interface layer translated as, Identify extraction unit and current assignment. Dale typed, Survey outer rim returning for recalibration. The node accepted this and opened a docking port. He was inside for 40 minutes. He did not fully understand what he was doing. Priya's notes were thorough but incomplete, and the node's interface had layers that the notes did not cover. He worked by logic and inference, and the particular stubbornness of someone who has already come this far and has decided that not understanding something fully is not the same as being unable to act. He found the instruction broadcast array. He found the authentication protocols. He spent 22 minutes on the authentication protocols, which were not designed to be circumvented but which had, as all systems designed by minds that have never been surprised, a gap where they had not imagined what a sufficiently motivated intruder might try. He shut the array down, not destroyed. Shut down. A clean stop, the kind that looks like scheduled maintenance to any monitoring system further up the chain. The kind that would be investigated eventually, but eventually in this context meant decades at minimum, because the Morith communication infrastructure operated on timescales that assumed the entities on the receiving end were not going anywhere. The fleet, 11 hours behind him, went silent. He learned this from the station's broadcast the following day, when he was most of the way back through the outer system with the drive at 60%, and a cracked secondary coolant line that he had patched with insulation tape and optimism. Daria's voice came through the comms, careful, controlled. The voice of someone who has spent the last 11 hours deciding what to feel and has settled on not feeling it yet. Fleet has stopped maneuvering, she said. Survey drones have gone to holding pattern. We're seeing the same signal across all 47 ships. Daria says it matches the behavioral default she predicted. A pause. Come home, Daria said. Kale did not say anything eloquent. There was nothing eloquent available. Fear. He was tired in a way that lived in his bones, and the coolant patch was making a noise he didn't like. And the stars outside the forward screen were just stars again, the ordinary stars of a system that had spent the last 14 cycles waiting to find out what it was going to become. He set the course. He engaged the drive at 55%, because that was what the coolant patch could support. He hummed his mother's melody into the empty cabin, into the quiet between the stars, all the way home. Sujin was the one who spotted the sable on the station's tracking screen. She did not shout. He stood up from the console very straight and said, with the calm of someone who has already accepted that good things can happen too, he's back. Doria was there. Hob was there. Priya was there. Already pulling up the node's shutdown confirmation data. Already building the report that would take months to write and decades to fully understand. They stood at the screen and watched the sable descend through the magnetized valley, slow and battered and radiating heat from a hull that had survived something it was not built to survive. Tip, touched down, the door opened. Kale stepped out into the thin morning air of the Korova Basin and stood there for a moment, just stood there with his eyes closed and his face turned toward us. Sky. It was just sky again, no second horizon, no crescent of ships, just the pale early light of a star that had been burning quietly for 5 billion years and would, all other things being equal, burn quietly for 5 billion more. Theria walked across the tarmac to meet him. She did not run. He walked. The way you walk towards something you were afraid you might never reach, carefully, like you want to remember how each step feels. She stood in front of him and said nothing. He opened his eyes, she said finally. Completely impossible. I know, he said. I did it anyway.